Most people don't think about stroke when they wake up in the morning. You roll out of bed, reach for your phone, pour some coffee, maybe scroll through the news. It feels completely harmless. But researchers studying cardiovascular events have noticed something that most people in the United States still haven't heard. The hours right after you wake up are when your brain is most vulnerable. Not the afternoon, not late at night, the morning. And the specific things millions of Americans do in that first hour could be quietly stacking the odds against them. You're about to find out exactly what those habits are and why cutting some of them out might be the most important health decision you make this year. Welcome back to Optivara Life, the channel where we take real health science and turn it into practical information you can actually use. If you're watching this for the first time, this is the place where we don't talk down to you, and we don't sugarcoat things either. We respect that you came here looking for something real. So let's get into it. Stroke is the 5th leading cause of death in the United States, and it's also one of the leading causes of long-term disability. What most people don't realize is that stroke doesn't usually arrive without warning. It tends to build over time, through pressure on blood vessels, through chronic inflammation, through habits that nobody told you were risky because they look so normal. The morning hours between roughly 6 and noon carry a significantly elevated risk for cardiovascular events, including stroke. Doctors call this the morning surge. Blood pressure tends to spike after waking. Blood clotting factors increase. The body is shifting from rest into activity, and if certain habits are added on top of that already elevated risk window, the stress on the cardiovascular system compounds quickly. Here's the first habit worth reconsidering. Reaching for your phone within the first few minutes of waking up has become so normal that it barely registers as a choice anymore. But the psychological jolt that comes from scrolling through news, notifications, and social media first thing in the morning triggers a cortisol response. Cortisol is your stress hormone, and in moderate amounts it's completely necessary. But when it spikes sharply right after waking, it drives up blood pressure at a moment when your vascular system is already in a sensitive state. For someone with underlying hypertension, even undiagnosed, that combination matters. The simple act of putting the phone across the room and giving yourself 10 minutes before engaging with screens costs nothing and takes almost no effort. But it changes the hormonal trajectory of your entire morning. The second habit is one a lot of people will push back on: drinking coffee immediately after getting out of bed. Not because coffee is bad for you overall. Many studies suggest moderate coffee consumption is fine and may even be mildly cardioprotective over time. The problem is the timing. For the first 90 minutes after waking, your cortisol is naturally elevated. Caffeine in that window doesn't actually give you more energy than you'd get later. It mostly adds to that cortisol load and can nudge blood pressure higher unnecessarily. Waiting until around 90 minutes after waking is a small adjustment that a lot of cardiologists already quietly suggest to their patients with hypertension. Third, and this one is surprisingly widespread, skipping water in the morning. After 6, 7, 8 hours without fluids, the body wakes up in a mildly dehydrated state. When blood volume drops even slightly, the heart has to work harder to push blood through the vessels. The blood itself becomes more viscous, which increases the risk of clot formation. Clots in the brain are what cause the majority of ischemic strokes, which account for about 87% of all stroke cases in the US. Drinking water first thing in the morning is a habit that costs nothing and takes about 30 seconds, but most people skip it in favor of coffee or just forget. If you reframe it as a cardiovascular habit, rather than just a hydration habit, it's easier to remember why it matters. The fourth habit is one that tends to get ignored because it feels so routine. Waking up and immediately jumping into a rush. Hitting snooze 3 times and then throwing yourself into getting ready, skipping breakfast, speeding through your commute, getting agitated in traffic. That kind of abrupt transition from sleep to high-stress activity is hard on the vascular system. There's actually research suggesting that people who experience chronic morning time pressure have measurably higher blood pressure readings throughout the day compared to those who wake with even a small buffer of calm. A 15-minute buffer, just setting your alarm earlier by a quarter of an hour, can meaningfully reduce that morning cortisol and blood pressure spike. Not eliminate it, but blunt it. 5th, eating a high-sodium breakfast. This one flies under the radar because we tend to associate sodium with dinner, with restaurant food, with processed meals. But a lot of common American breakfast items, packaged cereals, cured meats, canned biscuit dough, even some protein bars, carry surprisingly high sodium loads. Sodium causes the body to retain water, which increases blood volume, which drives blood pressure up. Starting the day with a high-sodium meal is essentially adding fuel to a fire that's already running hot during the morning surge window. It doesn't mean breakfast has to be boring. It means being aware of what's actually in the foods you're eating before noon. The 6th habit is one that's become very American specifically: sitting completely still for the first couple of hours of the morning. A lot of people wake up, sit through a commute, sit at a desk, and look up at 10 in the morning having barely moved. Light physical movement in the morning, nothing extreme, just a 10-minute walk or a few minutes of stretching, has been shown in multiple studies to improve endothelial function. The endothelium is the thin layer lining your blood vessels, and it plays a direct role in regulating blood pressure and preventing clot formation. When it's healthy and responsive, it helps vessels dilate and contract appropriately. When it's stiff and underworked, it contributes to the conditions that lead to stroke over time. Morning movement is one of the cheapest and most underused cardiovascular tools there is. 7th, and perhaps the most underestimated, ignoring blood pressure. Not just the reading, but the conversation around it. Millions of Americans have high blood pressure and genuinely don't know, because they haven't had it checked in years. High blood pressure is sometimes called the silent killer, not because it's dramatic, but because it produces almost no symptoms right up until something serious happens. Morning is when blood pressure tends to be highest. If someone already has elevated pressure and they layer several of these habits on top of it, that morning window becomes genuinely risky. The most protective thing a person can do after working on the habits above is to know their actual numbers. Home blood pressure monitors are inexpensive and widely available. Knowing where you stand changes how seriously you take everything else. None of this is about fear. The goal here is not to make mornings feel dangerous or to create anxiety around things that are supposed to be ordinary. The goal is to close the gap between what most of us assume is fine and what the evidence actually suggests. Stroke kills or permanently disables hundreds of thousands of Americans every year, and the frustrating truth is that a meaningful percentage of those events are preventable. Not through medication or complicated interventions, but through consistent, small adjustments in behavior over time. The morning habits you repeat every single day add up. The good ones compound in your favor. The harmful ones compound against you. If you found this useful, the most meaningful thing you can do is share it with someone you care about. A parent with hypertension, a sibling who's been skipping checkups, a friend who's always skipping water and drinking coffee, the second their alarm goes off. These conversations matter more than people realize, and if you want to keep getting the kind of health information that actually respects your intelligence, subscribe to Optivara Life. We're here every week with research-backed content on cardiovascular health, nutrition, aging, and the kinds of things that your body is doing quietly in the background that deserve your attention. Take care of yourself. We'll see you in the next one.